On June 5, 2017, an 18-year-old mother named Brooke Anderson sat inside a Nashville fast food restaurant with her mother, Shannon Anderson. At some point, Shannon claims she stepped away to use the bathroom, but when she returned, Brooke was gone, never to be seen again. She left behind no car, no money, and a 1-year-old baby boy. For years, the world wondered why she had walked out of that restaurant that day and vanished into thin air. But 9 years later, police made a chilling discovery. Brooke never walked out of that Jack in the Box, and in fact, she had likely never even been there. Jodie Brooke Anderson, who went by her middle name, was born on September 9, 1998, and was just 18 years old when she disappeared. She was described as a beautiful, intelligent, and warm individual who had, unfortunately, according to her aunt, gone down the wrong path in life. By the summer of 2017, Brooke and her mother were both homeless and both struggling with drug addiction, living day to day in the North Nashville corridor around Brick Church Pike and Trinity Lane. Then, when she disappeared that summer, her father and his side of the family took notice. They knew she was living a transient lifestyle, but she always checked in and was fiercely active on Facebook. So when all communication with Brooke suddenly stopped, and she missed her son's first birthday and a June 10, 2017 court appearance, her aunt, Deanna Anderson, began trying to find out where she was. So she reached out to Shannon and was told the story about her going missing from the Jack in the Box on June 5, 2017. To keep this story going, Shannon went to the police department on August 9th and officially reported her daughter missing. However, it wouldn't take investigators long to poke holes in her story. First of all, Brooke had been in the Metro Nashville jail until June 7th, 2 days after she allegedly vanished. She had also sent a Facebook message, which would be her last, on the morning of June 10th. It was at this moment that investigators realized they were being lied to. As they looked more into Shannon, they would discover she had been arrested and charged with promoting prostitution in Nashville 4 days after the last Facebook message from Brooke. Even though they had proven the Jack in the Box story false, they still didn't know what happened to Brooke, and Shannon was not cooperating. She even flat out refused to help search for her daughter, a fact that has led missing person advocates and family members to believe she was somehow involved. Shannon's actions over the next decade would do nothing but further suspicions about her involvement. For 9 consecutive years following Brooke's disappearance, Shannon actively submitted public assistance paperwork to the state of Tennessee. She kept Brooke listed as a dependent on her welfare cases and falsified documents to make it look like she was still housing and feeding her teenage daughter. Investigators would eventually discover that she had pocketed more than $5,000 in electronic food stamps benefits entirely in Brooke's name. They believed she did this to fund her transient lifestyle and her addiction to drugs. All this would finally catch up to her when she was arrested on May 27, 2026, and charged with felony food stamp fraud. She was also booked for sex offender registry violations, which stemmed from the 2017 conviction for promoting prostitution. Unfortunately, while the latest arrest brought Brooke's name back into the public spotlight, it did nothing to help find her. Today, the disappearance of Jodie Brooke Anderson remains an open cold case with the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department, and the Jack in the Box where her mother claims she was last seen has since closed. Her son, who was a baby when Brooke vanished, is now 10 years old. At the time she went missing, Jodie Brooke Anderson was described as standing about 5 feet 4 inches tall and weighing around 160 pounds, with brown hair and brown eyes. Both of her ears and her upper lip were pierced, and she has a tattoo of the words, "Daughter of a King," high on her chest, over her collarbone. If you or anyone you know has information about the disappearance of Brooke, please call the Metro Nashville Police Department Cold Case Unit at 615-862-7329 or Crime Stoppers at 615-742-7463. Even the smallest detail, all these years later, could be the one that finally brings her home. Jodie Brooke Anderson disappeared in June 2017, and as of July 2026, she remains missing, and this case remains unsolved. At approximately 1:40 in the morning on Monday, November 5th, 1979, a Charlotte County Sheriff's deputy by the name of John Greer radioed dispatch from a farm store convenience store at the intersection of U.S. Highway 17 and North Washington Loop Road in Punta Gorda, Florida, to report that he'd just discovered the clerk inside had been shot. By the time other officers arrived, 25-year-old Adele Marie Easterly, who managed the store, was found dead on the floor from 2 shotgun blasts, one in the back and one in the head, and missing from the register was $7.34. It would then take 45 years and a deathbed confession in a Tennessee care center for investigators to confirm what some of them had suspected all along, that the killer was one of their own. Adele Marie Easterly was a 25-year-old woman from Arcadia, Florida, a small town in DeSoto County about 40 minutes north of Punta Gorda. She was described as a bright and independent individual who worked the overnight shift as an assistant manager at the farm store to support herself. The convenience store sat near the DeSoto-Charlotte County line in a stretch of Highway 17 that, in 1979, was patrolled by Charlotte County deputies on the midnight shift, and Adele had recently begun dating one of those deputies. According to her friend, the deputy would visit her at the store during her shift and bring in his personal double-barreled 12-gauge shotgun. He claimed he was doing this for her protection, even though he had his department-issued sidearm on him as well. While it was definitely strange, Adele allegedly welcomed the added security due to the farm store being very isolated and vulnerable during her late-night shifts. The deputy she was dating was later identified as John J. Greer, the same officer who allegedly found her shot to death. Deputy Greer was a married man and had been secretly dating Adele for several months before she discovered the truth. Upon learning that he was married and living with his wife Jackie in Port Charlotte, Florida, she decided to end the relationship. However, Greer refused to let go and lied to Adele, telling her that he had already confronted his wife and demanded a divorce. That's when he told a very shocking story. He said that when he asked Jackie for a divorce, she became hysterical, grabbed his police service revolver, and threatened to shoot herself. He claimed they wrestled over the gun, it went off, and Jackie was killed. Turns out the story was partially true. On August 27, 1979, just over 2 months before Adele was killed, John Greer had called the sheriff's office to report that his wife, Jackie Greer, had shot herself at their home in Port Charlotte. Greer was off duty at the time and told responding deputies he had been sleeping and had heard what sounded like a pop. When he got up to look for Jackie, he said he saw smoke coming out of a closet. He opened the door and found her inside, shot. The investigators at the time suspected the story didn't quite hold together, but there was no physical evidence to contradict it. It was then ruled that Jackie took her own life. However, as you can see, this was a completely different story from what he had told Adele. Over the next 2 months, Adele's feelings toward Greer shifted from romantic interest to utter dread. But because he was an active duty sheriff's deputy who patrolled her area, she couldn't easily escape him, and he continued showing up at her workplace under the guise of protecting her with his shotgun. 2 weeks before her own death, Adele had told her friend that she was terrified of Greer and was desperate to find a way to get away from him that didn't require her to quit her job, but unfortunately, that would never happen. On the morning of Monday, November 5th, 1979, Greer radioed dispatch to report that he had found Adele shot to death inside. When other officers arrived, they found that she'd been killed by 2 close-range blasts from a 12-gauge shotgun, the same type of gun that Greer was using to allegedly protect the store. The cash register had been cleaned out, with approximately $7.34 missing, making the scene appear on the surface as a robbery gone wrong. But mysteriously, there were no signs of forced entry or a struggle, and no spent shotgun shell casings were found at the scene. From the beginning, other deputies were suspicious of Greer's involvement, but they had no physical evidence to prove it, and the case eventually went cold. Less than a year later, on September 20th, 1980, the husband of another woman in Greer's orbit reported his wife missing. Her body was found 9 days later, sitting in her Ford Mustang in a wooded area of Port Charlotte. Empty pill bottles were found in the car, along with what appeared to be a legitimate note explaining why she took her own life. Unfortunately, the body was too decomposed to determine the cause of death, and there were no obvious signs of trauma. But the woman's husband told the sheriff's office that Greer had been following his wife around, coming to their house while on duty, and attempting to pursue a sexual relationship with her. According to the cold case team's later assessment, that complaint likely triggered an internal investigation into Greer, though the records confirming it have not survived. Finally, on October 3, 1980, with all the suspicions surrounding Greer, he was suspended and resigned that same day. After leaving Charlotte County, Greer drifted through several other police and sheriff's offices, mostly on Florida's west coast. He was also a pilot, and over the years he held various pilot and aircraft-related positions in and around Kingsport, Tennessee, where he eventually settled. In 2009, the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office formed a cold case unit, and Adele Easterly's case was among those reopened. In November of 1986, detectives had already taken one important step. They'd asked a crime scene investigator with the Broward County Sheriff's Office, trained in blood spatter analysis, to re-examine the scene of Jackie Greer's death. While the investigator could not definitively determine whether she took her own life or was murdered, one thing was certain. It didn't happen the way Greer described. There was no blood spatter on the inside of the closet door, which would have been there if the door had been closed when the shot was fired. Instead, the chemicals used to detect blood revealed traces in the door jamb, which proved the closet door was open at the time Jackie was shot. The next break came in 2016, when cold case detectives publicly featured Adele's case on the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office's Unsolved Cases website. The detectives deliberately released more information than they normally would, including hints that a law enforcement officer might have been involved, and that the suspect was now an elderly man living in Kentucky or Tennessee. The bait worked, and in late 2019, a former Sheriff's Office explorer came forward. The Explorer program had been a youth training initiative for young people interested in law enforcement, and this woman had been part of the program in 1979. When detectives interviewed her, she told them Greer had sexually assaulted her on multiple occasions and had repeatedly threatened to kill her. During one of those assaults, she said Greer told her something she would never forget. According to her, Greer said, "Ask them dead bitches like Adele Easterly what happens when they say no to me." She also went on to say that on the night Adele was murdered, she'd been working in dispatch and remembered seeing Greer pull into the sheriff's office complex that night and enter through the east side door, which was where the locker room was. She saw what looked like a long gun in his hand. She said he looked disheveled, and one of his black gloves was off, and he appeared to have blood on his bare hand. When Greer noticed she was watching, he motioned or told her to get back into dispatch. A few minutes later, he came back inside, this time through the west side door, looking like he had just showered. Cold case detectives interviewed several other former sheriff's office employees and explorers, and developed enough evidence to support probable cause for an arrest. They continued building the case, hoping to gather enough to support a conviction. By the time they were ready to confront Greer directly, he was 75 years old, bedridden in an extended care facility in Kingsport, Tennessee. In April of 2023, cold case detectives flew to Tennessee and interviewed John Greer at the care center. He was lucid but frail, able to understand questions, but only able to give short answers. When detectives asked him directly if he had shot Adele Easterly and his wife Jackie, Greer shockingly confessed to both killings. Unfortunately, he was not well enough to be moved or to stand trial. They also couldn't determine from him whether he had killed Jackie intentionally or whether her death was truly an accident after a fight over the gun. Greer would die on March 2, 2024, at 77 years old, never being charged with either murder. Regardless, on December 31, 2024, the Charlotte County Sheriff's Office formally closed the Adele Marie Easterly case and publicly named Greer as her killer. The Cold Case Unit has continued to investigate Greer's history, looking for any other violent crimes he may have committed in Florida or elsewhere, but to date, no other victims have been identified. As for the woman who was suspiciously found dead in her Ford Mustang in September 1980, Greer never confessed, and they've never been able to link him to her death.